And I have a lot to talk about upstairs, but I'm so pleased to see my boy Durand hanging down, displayed down here so well. Now, this whole thing with Durand, this is one of, I don't know how many dozens of Provençal landscapes that Durand did. It's a study that has, that relates very closely to one in the Boston Museum, which very rarely hangs in the Boston Museum, which is a study of the same motif, but standing maybe a few paces to the side, and then painting the same motif. And now look what Durand does here. Here's the painter. You saw some beautiful Claude Durand at the museum, the National Gallery upstairs in the modern section. They were quite nice, those Claude Durand. And naturally, he went through a tremendous transformation. I mean, this happens in all the arts. I mean, if you think in terms of jazz, of early Lester Young with Count Basie, and then late Lester Young before he died, there's like an enormous, I mean, when he was feeling healthy both times, there's an enormous difference between the man grows and needs different things. And the same thing in the terms of the painting of Durand. He went through this whole crucible by fire of Fauvism. He, and of course there was the old man Matisse, and there was Blamack. Those are the three principal ones. And then he felt this is not enough. It's not enough to say, all right, I have a pure vermilion on the canvas, and I put a pure emerald green against that. I've got a pure saturated plane of lemon yellow. I'll put a deep cobalt violet against that. I have this marvelous orange, and I put this blue against that. You know, he said, all right, that's it, but I have other things, there's something else I need. Then he and Braque and Picasso, and after that, this marvelous painter Grieg, they all became interested in late Cézanne and in early Cézanne, but particularly in the later part of Cézanne. That's when Durand had his feeling for the later Cézanne. And he began to restrict his palette and to make paintings like that marvelous table that's in the Metropolitan Museum. But if you want to see that period of Durand, you have to go to Russia, to the Hermitage, and see this marvelous series that he has. Or look in Pablo Picasso's collection in the Picasso Museum in Paris with that beautiful young girl, very crisp, very fresh painting of a young girl, a very strange, melancholic look to her. Or go to Copenhagen and see the Two Sisters by Durand. Those are also masterpieces by Durand of that period, which Giacometti would call the Byzantine period of Durand. Well, Durand gets involved in the First World War. He's in the trenches for about 4 or 5 years. He gets out around 1919, and then he travels to Italy, and he goes to the south of France, and he says, in a letter that he wrote to Blamack from the trenches, he said, you know, I find Cubism very stupid and limited. It revolts me more and more. It's like, you know, it's like everything is the right angle, and finally they're using it like cinnamon. I'm sort of paraphrasing several things that he said about it, and it impeded his need for freedom. And you know, I love that Braque and Picasso show in New York that we saw at the Museum of Modern Art. It's a marvelous show. It just made me feel like wanting to go home and paint. But I could see Durand's attitude. He said, I want to really paint the portrait of a woman, and with the hair and the skin and everything. I want to paint what happens in a landscape, and this thing is going to stop me from that. You know, I want to find a plastic language which is as valid and true in every sense that we're worrying about that flat two-dimensional surface, and yet which is fully alive. And this is the result. 1921 or so he paints this. It's one of a great series of these things. Now look what he does. You know, in the 17th century Dutch landscapes, they have maybe 2/3 sky and 1/3 land, and they get a rapport instantly between the sort of pushing together, compacting of the mass of the land against the larger expanse of the sky. It's like, I push down, I open up. I push down, I open up. Now look how cleverly Durand, all of you painters here, you know, you all realize that with color, what is above all important is to use color not as an embellishment or a coloring in, but as a constructive element in your painting in the same way your drawing works. And as an example of where it doesn't happen, you can go into the next room, and despite the honesty an obsession which is attractive in the Thomas Eakins. He has no understanding of color. But we can find upstairs a painting by Corot, or in the other room a painting by Courbet with what apparently looks like the same palette, and they understand everything about color. And so it's not a question that Duran abandoned color at all. He adapted a palette and explored, in the sense of taking his chances. He explored a palette which met his emotional needs in terms of what he needed to build these paintings. And you look at this and you say, all right, he has that large expanse of the sky, that expanse of a very luminous light plane, which modulates. It gets sort of a warm salmon color mixed in here, and then becomes lighter here and very light on sort of a horizontal streak, and then suspended. And report to that, he invents, because you always are inventing. That's where the layman doesn't understand a lot about painting. They think, oh, somebody is painting somebody in front of them. And that means all they're doing is copying, Oh, it's all done for you. That's sort of the prejudice that lurks behind so many people today. They think, well, if you paint something right in front of you, you're doing a copy, and that's sort of half cheating, You're not being creative. But what you're doing when you paint, as you all know, because you do it every day at the school, you're having to make millions of decisions as you paint, and you're having to invent rhythms that tell you to go this way, that way, this way, that way, just as it happens in that beautiful Mondrian and in the other gallery. You're always having to do that. And look what Duran does here. He has this marvelous invention of that light plane of the sky and these two light planes here of the foliage of the trees. They're like miraculous exhalations. They're these miraculous puffs. They seem to grow before your eyes, and it gets these little lights, ting, 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 ting against it. And then when he works this hot Provençal earth down here, and it's with sort of the bones of the earth there. Look what he does with that road. He goes like that, and he comes up like that, the light thing there, and perfectly gets this mass in the bottom of the painting to be here, and that dark contrasting mass of the stand of trees to be where that is in space, and then works out the little complications of the landscape here. The more you begin to look back and forth at the painting, the more you realize how well he's managed to manipulate these forms so they all have a plastic validity within that structure. And this is very nice painting, but it's by no means the masterpiece of Duran's career of landscapes. He will develop this and go further and further with it throughout his lifetime. And it's lovely that we have a chance to see this little portrait. I'm told it's of Madame Duran. I met her when she was much older, and I certainly recognize her features from that thing by the marvelous sculptor Despio there. I don't quite recognize her here, but it's a typical Duran sketch of a head. And you see the way he'll use the weight of that kind of green against the lightness of this olive green and working with these earth reds, and then get this little lights occurring the way he does. It's so nice to see. Now, Duran's of this period we just don't get to see in the museums, unfortunately. And as for even later Duran's, it's such a no-no. The only major museum to buy in recent years two superb late Durans is the Tate Gallery. Unfortunately, the new guy at the Tate Gallery is a great believer in fun and games that are being applauded today, and I have from the grapevine that he might not hang these Durans, which is a great, great pity. I haven't spoken about one of the people I worship. I worship all of these artists we've been looking at, but I haven't spoken about this man, Rouault. And I didn't visit Rouault, but I visited his apartment a couple of times after he died, because Isabel, this sort of a guardian of her father's work, who's a painter herself, a rather tough, determined lady, still lives in that apartment, and it's this sort of cavernous, dark, gloomy, bourgeois apartment. apartment opposite the Gare de Lyon, and he worked in a little room off the foyer on a kitchen table. Everything was flat. We saw that movie and we saw a photograph of that room. And this painting, I think, the light is not so good on it because when you're close here, you get a raking light, and he painted with such an amount of pigment and it's sunk in so much. But take a look at what he does there. How he has the figure of Christ, how he has that dark sort of blue and green that comes down slightly on a bias, almost on a vertical, but slightly on a bias coming down here. And then he has the Christ shoulder actually much more as a vertical, even though there's a curve to it, you feel a vertical stability in it, and then an absolute horizontal of Christ's arm on the table, and he nudges in, and he gets a difference in weight between this plane of color that makes this arm and the chest. You see how that thing nudges in there. Then he makes to the other arm, and he begins to feel that drive of a diagonal here, and how nicely he works with those reds. He has a cadmium red light, a sort of a cadmium vermilion here on the guy's chest, right here, coming vertical and then on a diagonal. And he has a diagonal of the arm slightly deeper. He had a yellow underneath and slightly deeper, and he really gets those things standing so bravely. He has two faint dusty reds up there, and then he hits a different kind of like a little cloud of red above the head of Christ. You really begin to feel that the guy gets a feeling. No wonder Soutine liked his work.